The sound of clinking glasses and the low hum of a jazz band filled the air as Stan Williams stepped into the grand entryway of the mansion. The light from the extravagant chandelier above reflected off the polished marble floors, casting a soft glow across the space. This was the kind of event that practically screamed wealth. Stan couldn't help but feel a little out of place, despite the fact that he'd attended events like this countless times. The birthday party of his childhood friend, Christina Harrington, was the latest in a long line of lavish gatherings. Christina's father, a tech mogul named Mark Harrington, had made his fortune in Silicon Valley and used his wealth to propel his family into the upper echelons of society. Christina had always been surrounded by that world, and so had Stan, thanks to their father's long-standing business partnership. Everything about this mansion screamed success: the towering marble columns, the crystal vases filled with exotic flowers, and the posh crowd milling around, all impeccably dressed in designer outfits. It was the type of party you went to if you were anyone, if you had money, power, or connections. And Stan, though he didn't care much for it anymore, was part of that world. He scanned the room absently, exchanging a few obligatory pleasantries with familiar faces. There were the usual crowd: business partners, wealthy socialites, and old family friends. The whole thing felt like a well-rehearsed performance. But then, as his gaze shifted toward the far end of the room, something caught his attention. Standing by a large bay window, bathed in the soft light from the setting sun, was a woman. She didn't seem to belong here, not in the way the others did. Her name was Ava. Ava was striking, but not in the typical, attention-grabbing way. Her dark hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and she wore a simple but elegant black dress that didn't scream for attention. She wasn't engaged in the small talk or mingling like the others. Instead, she stood alone, her gaze out the window, twirling a glass of wine absent-mindedly in her hand. Stan found himself watching her, transfixed by her presence. There was something about her, an aura of calm that contrasted sharply with the energy of the party. She wasn't putting on an act. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. And that made her stand out like a beacon in a room full of pretenders. "Who's that?" Stan asked his friend Ethan, who had appeared next to him without him realizing. Ethan followed Stan's gaze, a knowing smile crossing his face. "Ava. She's Christina's friend from college. I haven't seen her around much before, though. New to the group, I guess." Stan frowned, intrigued. "She's different from the others," he muttered. "She is," Ethan agreed, with a smirk. "She's not like the typical crowd. I think she's just here for Christina. Not really into the whole scene." Stan nodded, not able to take his eyes off Ava. There was something captivating about her, something raw and untamed. Most of the women he knew were quick to flirt, eager to join the circles of the rich and famous. They wore their wealth like a badge, indulging in every superficial conversation that allowed them to climb a little higher on the social ladder. But Ava was different. She was quiet, almost aloof. She didn't care about making small talk or putting on a show. Without thinking, Stan began moving toward her. It wasn't intentional. He simply found himself walking in her direction, as though something unseen was pulling him closer. Ava didn't seem to notice his approach at first, but as he drew near, she turned her head slightly. Their eyes met for the briefest of moments, and Stan felt a jolt run through him. Her gaze was steady, almost as if she were searching him. But just as quickly, she looked away, turning back to the view outside the window. Stan cleared his throat, catching his breath. He wasn't sure what to say, but the silence was too much. "I don't think we've met," he said, his voice low and smooth. "I'm Stan." She turned to face him fully now, offering a polite but reserved smile. Ava, she replied, her tone neutral. Ava? Stan repeated, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. That's a beautiful name. She nodded, not quite meeting his gaze. It's just a name. It doesn't mean anything special. Stan chuckled, a little surprised by her nonchalance. I don't know, it suits you. He paused, trying to push past the awkwardness. So, how do you know Christina? Ava glanced at him briefly, her expression unreadable. We're in the same class at Stanford, she answered. But we're not really close. Just acquaintances. Stan raised an eyebrow. You don't seem like the typical Stanford crowd, he said, motioning subtly to the extravagant room around them. Ava's lips curled into a faint, almost amused smile. I guess I'm not, she said, shrugging lightly. But I don't really mind. Stan found himself fascinated by her lack of pretense. Most of the people here would be fawning over him, trying to make a good impression. But Ava wasn't playing that game. She wasn't interested in his family's fortune or his social status. She wasn't concerned with fitting in. The silence stretched for a moment as both of them just stood there, the noise of the party fading into the background. Stan followed her gaze out the window, his mind racing with questions he wasn't sure he wanted to ask. There, in the distance, stood the headquarters of his family's tech company, the towering glass building that his father had built from the ground up. You see that building? He asked, gesturing toward it. My dad built that. It's the pride of the city. He made it happen. Ava looked at it briefly before turning her gaze back to him. It's impressive, she said simply, though her tone wasn't the kind of awe that he was used to hearing when people talked about his father's empire. Stan frowned slightly, surprised by her lack of enthusiasm. Yeah, well, it's been a lot of work. And I'll be taking over one day. It'll be mine. Ava didn't seem impressed by the statement. She nodded slowly, her lips curving slightly at the edges. I'm sure it will be, she said, her voice cool. Good for you. Stan felt an odd mixture of confusion and irritation bubbling up inside him. Why wasn't she impressed? Why didn't she care? It was almost as though she didn't see him the way everyone else did. But then, before he could speak again, she broke the silence. You'll be happy, right? She asked, her voice quieter now. With everything. The business, the building, the company. It's all going to be yours, but, will it make you happy? The question caught him off guard. It was unexpected, and it made him pause. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to people asking him about happiness, about anything other than success. Stan blinked, realizing he hadn't thought about it that way. I guess I'll find out, he replied slowly. Ava didn't smile, but her eyes softened, almost as if she understood something he didn't. Good luck, she said, turning back to the window, as if signaling the end of their conversation. Stan stared at her for a moment longer, unsure what had just happened. Something had shifted in him, something he wasn't ready to acknowledge. But as he turned to rejoin the party, he felt the pull to understand her more deeply. To figure out why he couldn't stop thinking about her. And as he walked away, a quiet realization began to form in the back of his mind. Ava was more than he had expected. And for the first time in a long while, he found himself eager to know more about the woman who didn't care about his wealth or his status. A week had passed since that night at Christina's party. Stan Williams found himself thinking about Ava more than he cared to admit. Her presence lingered in his mind, a mystery he couldn't shake. For the first time in ages, he felt a curiosity about someone that wasn't based on their position, their wealth, or how they could elevate his social standing. Ava was different. And for someone like Stan, who had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted something from him, that was a rare thing. He couldn't help but replay their brief conversation in his mind. She had been so composed, so unfazed by his usual charm and the attention he'd always gotten from women in his social circle. Most women, even the ones who pretended not to care about his family's fortune, would have at least tried to impress him. But Ava hadn't. And that intrigued him. It wasn't long before he decided he had to see her again. He wasn't sure why, or what he even wanted from her, but he couldn't deny the pull he felt. She had something that no one else in his world had, a sense of self, a calm that was both unsettling and comforting at the same time. After a few text exchanges and a couple of phone calls, he managed to arrange a meeting. They agreed to meet at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, away from the glitz and glamour of the world they both came from. It felt like the right choice, somehow. They didn't need the pretense of fancy dinners or glamorous venues. For once, Stan just wanted to talk. To understand. As he arrived at the cafe, the faint scent of coffee beans mixed with the rich aroma of baked goods, a welcome contrast to the sterile, corporate atmosphere he was used to. He spotted Ava immediately. She was sitting at a small table by the window, sipping from a coffee cup, her focus seemingly on something far beyond the cafe walls. She wore a simple black sweater, jeans, and no makeup, but she still managed to look effortlessly beautiful. It was as if the world didn't need to recognize her. She was perfectly content in her own skin. "Hey," Stan greeted, his voice tentative as he approached her table. Ava looked up, her face breaking into a small, reserved smile. "Stan. I didn't expect you to actually show up." He laughed, a little self-consciously. "What, you thought I was just playing games?" Ava shrugged, setting her coffee down. "I didn't know what to expect, honestly." Stan sat down across from her, running a hand through his hair. "I wasn't sure either," he admitted. "But here we are." For a moment, they sat in silence, the sounds of the cafe filling the space between them. Stan wasn't sure what to say. He had no game plan for this conversation. He'd never really needed one before. Women typically fell into predictable categories: they wanted attention, or they wanted to use him for his connections. Ava didn't seem interested in any of that. She didn't want his money or his status. She wasn't trying to get anything from him. "So, what made you come out here today?" Ava asked, breaking the silence with a question of her own. Her tone was casual, but there was an underlying sharpness to it, like she wasn't afraid to dig a little deeper if needed. Stan thought for a moment, then sighed. "Honestly, I don't know. I've been thinking about you since that night. I don't get it. You're not like the others." Ava raised an eyebrow. "And what makes you think that?" Stan leaned back in his chair, searching for the right words. "The others, most people I meet, they want something from me. But you don't seem to care about any of that. You didn't fawn over me. You didn't try to impress me. You just were yourself." Ava's expression softened slightly, though there was still a hint of mystery in her eyes. "I don't need anything from you, Stan. I'm not here to chase your approval. I'm just here. I think you're used to people playing a part, trying to fit into your world. But that's not me." Stan felt a strange mixture of relief and frustration. He'd never had anyone talk to him like that. Most people wanted something, whether it was a connection, a favor, or to be seen with him to boost their own standing. But Ava wasn't like that. She was holding something back, something deeper, but he couldn't figure out what it was. "I can't figure you out," he said finally, his voice a little rough. "It's refreshing. But it also drives me crazy. I'm used to people being open, saying what they want. You don't do that. Ava studied him for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. Maybe I don't need to. Maybe what you're looking for isn't something you can find so easily. Stan's brow furrowed. What do you mean? I mean, Ava said slowly, her voice steady, sometimes people get so caught up in what they think they should want, that they miss what's right in front of them. You're not used to people not trying to get something from you. You're used to being the center of attention. But I don't care about any of that. There was something in her words that struck a chord with Stan. It was like she saw through him in a way no one else had. The realization made him uncomfortable, but it also intrigued him more than anything ever had. He had spent his whole life being surrounded by people who wanted to be close to him for the wrong reasons, his family's money, his connections. But Ava, she didn't want any of that. A silence fell over them again, but it was a comfortable one, different from the awkward pauses that usually filled his conversations with people he barely knew. Ava wasn't judging him. She wasn't trying to make him feel inferior. She wasn't competing for his attention. I like this, Stan said suddenly, surprising himself. This, not needing to perform. Just talking. Ava's smile widened a little, though it was still subtle. Good. I'm not here for any games, Stan. I'm just here because I'm curious about you. I'm not going to try and impress you, or make you think I'm something I'm not. And if that bothers you, well, then maybe we shouldn't keep meeting. Stan shook his head quickly, suddenly eager to keep this conversation going. No, I like it. I just don't know where this is going, you know. Ava took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes never leaving him. I don't know either. But sometimes it's nice not to have everything figured out. To just be. Stan stared at her for a moment, trying to process what she was saying. He had never met someone like her, someone who didn't need to have all the answers, someone who could just exist in the moment without worrying about where it would lead. It was freeing, in a way. I guess I'm just not used to this, he admitted quietly. To someone who's not chasing something. Ava smiled again, and this time it was more genuine, less guarded. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe you've been chasing the wrong things all along. It was a simple statement, but it hit Stan harder than anything else she had said. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and true. For the first time in a long time, Stan wasn't sure what to say next. Ava wasn't like the others. She wasn't looking for validation or attention. She didn't care about the things he thought were important. And it left him questioning everything he had taken for granted. The days following Stan's meeting with Ava felt different, somehow. He found himself restless, pacing his apartment in the evenings when he had no meetings or business calls. His thoughts kept circling back to her, to the way she made him feel, exposed and raw, yet somehow freer than he'd ever felt around anyone else. She had become an enigma, and he couldn't quite shake the need to understand her. Ava was not like the women he had known. She didn't play games, didn't flirt or feign interest in his family's wealth. There was no pretense with her. She wasn't interested in impressing anyone, least of all him. Stan was used to being chased, to being the center of attention, whether it was because of his name, his family, or his wealth. But Ava seemed to see through all of that. It was both infuriating and incredibly refreshing. He couldn't help but notice the small things about her, the way she always wore the simplest outfits, never anything extravagant. She was often in jeans and a jacket, or some loose dress that looked like it could have come from a thrift store, yet she carried herself with an effortless elegance that made everything else seem trivial. There was something about the way she moved, the way she talked, slow, deliberate, yet never overly serious, that drew him in even more. Stan had tried to reach out to her a few times after their cafe meeting. He wasn't sure what he wanted. It was strange, he didn't typically chase after women, but Ava was different. She had an energy that both intrigued and challenged him, and for the first time in ages, he found himself wanting to know more about someone without a clear endgame. There was no rush with her, and yet every interaction felt charged, like there was a magnetism between them that neither of them could deny. After several casual phone calls and texts, he finally invited her to meet again. This time, he suggested a walk in the park. It seemed like the right thing to do. There was something peaceful about the simplicity of it, a quiet walk, no pressures, no expectations. Just the two of them. He wasn't sure if she'd be interested, but to his surprise, she agreed. The sun was just starting to set when they met at the park's entrance, the sky painted with hues of orange and pink. It was a warm spring evening, and the air felt fresh against Stan's skin. He had dressed casually for the occasion, in jeans and a simple t-shirt, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow out of his element. Ava was already there, standing near a bench, looking as comfortable in her own skin as always. She was wearing a simple sundress, the kind that looked like it had been pulled from her closet without a second thought, paired with worn sneakers that showed the faintest signs of use. "Hey," Stan greeted her as he approached, a slight nervousness creeping into his voice that he hadn't expected. He offered her a small smile, trying to shake off the tension. Ava looked up and smiled back, a quiet, genuine smile that always made his chest tighten in a way he couldn't quite explain. "Hey, Stan," she replied, her voice warm but still casual, as if there was no real weight behind the conversation. They started walking side by side, the grass crunching underfoot as they made their way down the winding path. The sound of birds chirping and children playing in the distance provided a soft backdrop, and for the first time in a long while, Stan felt a sense of calm settle over him. It wasn't like the bustling nights in high-end restaurants or the endless business meetings with people he barely knew. This was real. This was just two people walking in a park, no expectations, no masks. Ava was quiet for a moment, clearly content to let the silence stretch between them. Stan, however, found himself wondering how long it would last. He was used to being the one to keep conversations going, to fill the spaces with idle chatter or clever remark. But with Ava, the silence didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt natural, like it was just as much a part of the connection between them as the words they exchanged. "So, what have you been up to?" Stan asked eventually, breaking the silence. He didn't want to sound like he was prying, but he was curious. He had never really asked her about her life outside of their brief meetings. Ava shrugged slightly, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her jacket. "Same old. Classes, projects, you know. Just keeping busy." Stan could tell there was more to it, but he didn't press. He wasn't sure why, but he respected her boundaries. "What's your major again?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Psychology," she answered, her eyes scanning the path ahead of them. "I'm interested in how people think, how they behave. You'd be surprised how much you can learn about someone just by watching them." Stan glanced at her, intrigued. "You sound like you're talking about me." Ava laughed softly, the sound light and easy. "No, not just you. But you'd be a good subject for someone who's interested in human behavior." Stan raised an eyebrow. "A good subject? What, because I'm complicated?" Ava turned to him, her gaze steady. "I didn't say complicated. I said interesting." She smiled, but it was that enigmatic smile again, the kind that made Stan feel like she knew something he didn't. He chuckled, though he wasn't entirely sure how to respond. Ava always had a way of turning things around, of making him feel like he was under some sort of gentle interrogation without even realizing it. "So, what would you say about me then?" he asked, suddenly intrigued. "What's my behavior like?" Ava considered this for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You're used to getting what you want," she said finally. "You don't have to try. You've always had people bending over backward for you, your family, your friends, your connections." Stan blinked, caught off guard by her directness. "That's a pretty bold thing to say." Ava didn't flinch. "It's true, isn't it?" For a moment, Stan didn't respond. He had been raised in a world where his name opened doors, where his family's wealth had given him a level of access that most people could only dream of. But Ava was right. He had never had to work for anything. It had always been handed to him on a silver platter. He exhaled slowly, realizing she wasn't saying it to insult him. She was just stating a fact, something he had never truly stopped to consider. "I suppose you're right," he admitted, his voice softer than usual. "I've never really had to earn anything. I've always had people doing things for me." Ava nodded, but her expression softened. "But that's not your fault, Stan. It's just the way you've been brought up. What matters is what you choose to do with it. What kind of person you decide to be." Stan let her words settle in, feeling an unfamiliar weight in his chest. For the first time, he thought about his life from an entirely different angle. Ava wasn't trying to shame him, she was simply pointing out the truth, one that he had never fully confronted before. The walk continued in silence for a few minutes, both of them lost in their thoughts. Eventually, they reached the edge of the park, where the trees thinned out and the city skyline was visible in the distance. The setting sun cast long shadows across the ground, and the sky was a brilliant canvas of oranges, pinks, and purples. "This is nice," Stan said, his voice low. He hadn't realized how much he had been enjoying their walk until that moment. Ava smiled, her gaze following his. "Yeah, it is. Sometimes it's good to step away from everything, don't you think?" Stan nodded, glancing at her. "Yeah. I think you're right." They stood there for a while, side by side, not needing to say anything else. It was enough just to be in each other's presence. The silence between them now felt like a comfortable companion, not something to be filled or avoided. As the evening drew to a close, Stan found himself reluctant to let the moment slip away. "Want to do this again sometime?" he asked, his voice almost hesitant. Ava turned to him, her eyes warm but guarded. "Sure. I'd like that." And with that, they parted ways, each carrying a quiet understanding of what had just passed between them. Neither of them knew exactly where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, Stan felt like he wasn't chasing after something. Instead, he was simply letting it happen, whatever it was. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Stan and Ava slowly began to build. After their peaceful walk in the park, Stan found himself constantly thinking about her. He had expected their connection to fizzle out, but it only grew stronger. He felt something inside him shifting, something he couldn't explain. His conversations with Ava were always different from anything he had experienced before. There were no superficial exchanges, no empty compliments. Just honest, real dialogue. He found it refreshing, almost intoxicating. But with that honesty came discomfort. Ava had managed to dig beneath the surface of his carefully constructed persona, and for the first time, Stan felt vulnerable. He wasn't used to that. He was the son of one of the wealthiest men in the city. He had always been in control, always held the power in any relationship, whether personal or professional. But with Ava, it was different. She wasn't looking for anything from him, and that made him feel both liberated and anxious. Stan had been trying to push these feelings aside, telling himself he shouldn't care. But every time Ava reached out, every time they met, he couldn't help but be drawn back to her. Her presence felt like a magnetic force he couldn't escape. It was a Friday afternoon when everything came to a head. Stan had just finished a long day at the office. His mind was occupied with his father's business, the decisions he had to make in the coming weeks, and the growing pressure to step up and take charge. He was supposed to be at a networking event that evening, one his father had encouraged him to attend, but as he looked at the invitation on his phone, his thumb hovered over the message he had sent to Ava earlier that week. He had asked her if she'd like to meet up for dinner. No elaborate plans, no expensive restaurants, just something simple. She had agreed, but now, as he stood at his desk, his mind raced with conflicting thoughts. This wasn't supposed to be anything more than a casual dinner, yet every time he thought about seeing her again, his heart seemed to race. What was it about her that made him feel like he was standing on the edge of something he wasn't ready for? The phone buzzed in his hand, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Ava. "Hey, Stan. I was thinking, maybe we can just meet at that little place we went to last time. I'm craving their burger." Stan smiled, shaking his head at how easygoing she was. She wasn't looking for some extravagant evening. She wasn't trying to impress him or anyone else. She just wanted to spend time with him. And that thought, simple as it was, unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. "Sounds perfect. I'll see you at 7. As the evening approached, Stan couldn't shake the feeling that something was different this time. The usual calmness he felt when meeting Ava was replaced with something more intense, something that he didn't want to acknowledge, but couldn't ignore. He tried to push it away, focusing instead on getting ready for the evening. When he arrived at the small cafe, it was almost exactly like the first time they had met. Ava was already there, sitting at their usual spot by the window, her back turned as she glanced at something on her phone. She looked so at ease, so grounded in the world around her, while Stan felt like he was floating above it all, disconnected. He walked up to the table, and Ava looked up with a soft smile. "Hey, Stan," she greeted him casually, as if it had only been a few days since they last met, though it had been more than a week. "Hey," Stan replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "How's your day been?" "Busy," she said with a shrug. "But it's good now." She motioned for him to sit down. "I wasn't sure if you were going to make it, honestly. Thought you'd be stuck at some event." Stan chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, I made an executive decision. Some things are just less important." He sat down across from her, trying to make himself comfortable despite the unease he couldn't quite shake. They ordered their food, and as they ate, the conversation flowed easily between them. It was the same pattern as before, small talk at first, but it always turned into something deeper. Ava had a way of getting him to open up, of making him talk about things he hadn't thought about in years. She asked questions he didn't expect, ones that cut through the surface-level answers he had grown so used to giving. "So, how's your dad?" Ava asked, her voice soft but direct. "Is he pushing you to take over the company yet?" Stan hesitated, taking a sip of his drink. His father's expectations were always there, hanging over him like a shadow. He had been expected to follow in his father's footsteps, to eventually take the reins of the company, but that was always a future he had avoided thinking about too deeply. "Yeah, he's been pushing. It's kind of unavoidable, you know. The pressure's there." Ava nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Does it ever feel like it's not your choice? Like you don't have any room to breathe?" Stan stared at his food for a moment, thinking. "Yeah, it does. Sometimes it feels like I don't have a choice in the matter." It's just, expected. I'm supposed to take over, and that's it. Ava studied him for a moment, her eyes intense yet compassionate. Do you want it, though? Do you want to take over? The question caught him off guard. He had never really asked himself that before. Did he want it? Or was he simply doing what was expected of him because it was easier to follow the path already laid out for him? I don't know, he admitted, his voice quieter now. I've never really had a chance to think about it. I've just been going with the flow. Ava's gaze softened, and she leaned forward slightly. That sounds exhausting. Stan looked up at her, his heart beating faster. There it was again, her ability to make him see things he hadn't noticed before. She was the first person who had ever asked him that question, the first person to make him stop and truly think about what he wanted. And for the first time in ages, he didn't know the answer. Ava smiled gently, sensing the weight of his thoughts. You don't have to have it all figured out right now, Stan. It's okay not to know. He nodded, appreciating her calm demeanor, but the unease still lingered in the pit of his stomach. There was a feeling in the air, a tension that neither of them had spoken about but that both could feel. It was in the way Ava's gaze held his, in the way his heart seemed to skip a beat when she was near. Something was changing, and neither of them could deny it. As the night wore on, their conversation shifted, becoming more personal, more intimate. They talked about their pasts, about their families, about things that had shaped them into the people they were now. Stan found himself revealing things he hadn't shared with anyone in years. He talked about the pressure of growing up in the shadow of his father's success, about the constant need to prove himself, even when he wasn't sure what he was proving. Ava, in turn, shared her own struggles, the challenges she faced as someone who had never been satisfied with just fitting in, the way she fought to carve out her own space in the world. At some point, Stan realized they had moved past the casual banter, past the superficial pleasantries that defined most of his interactions. This was real. This was something deeper. But as the evening drew to a close, there was a shift in the air. Stan's heart raced as he looked across the table at Ava. There was a moment of silence, an electric tension between them. He didn't know what it meant, didn't know what to do with it, but he couldn't ignore it. Stan, Ava said quietly, breaking the silence. I don't think we should keep doing this. Her words hit him like a punch in the gut. For a moment, he couldn't process what she was saying. What do you mean? He asked, his voice shaky. Ava sighed, looking down at her hands. I think we're both starting to want something that we can't have. And I don't want to hurt you, Stan. I don't think we're on the same page. The words stung more than he expected. He had known, deep down, that this wasn't supposed to be easy. But hearing it out loud, hearing her say it, made it all too real. I don't want to lose this, Stan said quietly, his voice raw with emotion. I don't want to lose you. Ava met his eyes, her expression soft yet firm. I think you should let go, Stan. You deserve more than this, more than what we're doing. The weight of her words settled between them, and Stan felt his world tilt, unsure of what was next. But deep down, he knew she was right. Something had changed, and whether they were ready to admit it or not, they were both standing on the edge of something they weren't sure they were prepared for. Stan couldn't remember the last time he had felt this confused. The evening at the cafe still lingered in his mind, like a storm cloud he couldn't shake. Ava's words echoed in his head. I think you should let go, Stan. You deserve more than this, more than what we're doing. Her soft voice, the way her eyes had searched his with a mix of sadness and resolve, it all replayed like an endless loop, torturing him with uncertainty. He had always been the one in control. It was the only thing he knew. People moved around him, shaped by his decisions, his connections. But with Ava, nothing was certain. Nothing was clear. She had walked into his life like a quiet force of nature, appending everything he had thought he knew about himself. And now she was pulling away, leaving him with nothing but questions. Stan had tried to focus on his work to distract himself. His father's company had been going through some significant transitions recently, and there was no shortage of meetings, emails, and financial reports to keep him busy. But even amidst the whirlwind of corporate decisions and the pressure of stepping into a more prominent role, his thoughts kept drifting back to Ava. Was she right? Was he just holding on to something that was never meant to be? Was he chasing an ideal instead of embracing what he really wanted? It was hard for him to even answer those questions. He had always been the type to pursue what he wanted, to make decisions with the kind of certainty that came from being surrounded by money, power, and the unwavering expectations of his family. But with Ava, nothing felt certain. He sat in his office late into the night, the city skyline visible through the glass walls. The lights of the buildings across the street flickered, and for a moment, it felt like the whole world was still, as if waiting for him to make some kind of decision. He had always believed that success was the answer to everything. That power, money, and influence would be enough to fulfill any void inside him. But now, sitting alone in the quiet of his office, that belief didn't feel as certain. At that moment, his phone buzzed on the desk, breaking his thoughts. He glanced down, and his heart skipped a beat. It was a message from Ava. "Stan, can we talk?" It wasn't much, but it was enough to make his pulse quicken. He had wanted to hear from her, had hoped that maybe they could find a way to bridge the gap that had formed between them. He quickly typed a reply, his fingers moving faster than his thoughts. "Of course." "When?" Within minutes, she replied. "Now. Can we meet at the park?" Stan didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket, not even bothering to think about what he was doing. He had to see her. They had to talk, to clear the air. He couldn't go another day with this weight hanging over him. The park was quiet when he arrived, the trees swaying gently in the evening breeze. The sun was setting, casting a soft glow over everything. It was the same park where they had walked together not long ago. The same place where everything had started to feel different, where the pull between them had grown stronger. Ava was already there, standing by a bench near the fountain. She was looking down at the ground, lost in thought. She looked uncertain, her usual calm demeanor replaced by something more vulnerable. Stan's heart tightened as he walked toward her. "Ava," he said softly, not sure if he should say more. She turned to face him, her expression a mix of sadness and resolve. "Hey," she replied, her voice quieter than usual. "Thanks for coming." Stan took a few steps closer, stopping just a few feet away from her. The space between them felt heavier than it should. "Of course," he said, his voice low. "You wanted to talk." Ava nodded, her gaze shifting to the ground for a moment before she looked back at him. "I've been thinking a lot about what I said," she began, her voice tentative. "And I don't want you to think that I'm pushing you away for no reason. I think you need to hear something." Stan's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Ava took a deep breath, as if gathering her thoughts. "Stan, you've been living in a world where everything is planned for you. Where your family's expectations shape every decision you make. I get it. I really do. But I don't think you're happy. I don't think you're living for yourself." Her words hit him like a punch. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, couldn't think. He had never considered it that way before. All his life, he had done what was expected of him. He had played the role, followed the path. But what if Ava was right? What if he had never asked himself what he really wanted? Ava. Stan started, his voice shaking. I don't know what you want from me. I don't know how to make this work. I don't know if I can. Ava's eyes softened, and she stepped a little closer. I'm not asking you to change overnight, Stan. But I think you need to find your own way. I think you need to decide what you want. Not what your family wants, not what the people around you expect. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to make sense of everything she was saying. But I've always been this way. My whole life has been about following the rules, doing what's expected. If I stop doing that, if I step away from it all, what am I left with? Ava reached out and touched his arm lightly, her touch surprisingly warm and grounding. You're left with you. And that's the part you've been ignoring, Stan. You've built this whole life around what you think you should be, but you've never asked yourself if it's really what you want. You've been chasing success, but not for the right reasons. He stared at her, her words sinking in deeper than he cared to admit. Chasing success, but not for the right reason. He had spent his whole life trying to please others, trying to prove his worth through achievements, through titles, through possessions. But now, standing here with Ava, he realized how little of it had ever been for himself. How little of it had truly made him happy. I don't know how to change that, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Ava smiled softly, a sad, knowing smile. You don't have to change everything all at once, Stan. But you have to start somewhere. You have to start asking yourself why you do the things you do. Why you want what you want. Stan stood there, in the quiet of the park, surrounded by the evening shadows, feeling as if his entire world had just been turned upside down. He had always thought he had everything figured out, that he had the world at his feet. But now, he wasn't so sure. He wasn't sure of anything. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the park, the rustling leaves, the distant chatter, seemed so distant now. Ava was right. His life had been dictated by everyone but himself. He had never really questioned it. Never asked himself what he wanted. Finally, Ava spoke again, her voice gentle but firm. I care about you, Stan. But I don't think we can keep doing this if you're not willing to make some changes. If you're not willing to put yourself first for once. The weight of her words settled in his chest. He had always been afraid of what it would mean to let go of the life he had built. Afraid of what would happen if he stopped living for everyone else. I don't want to lose you, Stan said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't want to let go of this, of us. Ava smiled softly, but there was a sadness in her eyes. You don't have to lose me, Stan. But you have to find yourself first. You have to be honest with yourself about what you want. And then, we'll see. For the first time in what felt like forever, Stan felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't about getting everything right in that moment. It was about starting, about making the decision to look inward and figure out who he was and what he wanted. As they stood together in the quiet of the park, something shifted. It wasn't the end, not yet. But it was the beginning of something else, something that could be real. Something he could build for himself. And for the first time, Stan was ready to face whatever that might be.